Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of English Elevate Express. I'm Sarah, and today we're diving into a topic that many of you have been asking about: how to think and speak in English more naturally. And of course, I'm joined by my awesome co host, Alex. How's it going, Alex?
Hey, Sarah. I'm doing great, thanks. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. I'm super excited about today's episode. This topic is something a lot of people struggle with, right? Like, they understand English well, but just can't seem to think or speak in it fluently.
Exactly. We'll be breaking down some key tips, habits, and mindsets that can help you start thinking in English, which is a huge step towards speaking it confidently. It's going to be a really practical conversation today.
Yeah, and as always, we'll keep it laid back and relatable, like we're just chatting over coffee. So, if you've been wanting to take your English to the next level, stick around.
All right, Alex, let's get into it. One of the first things I want to talk about is the idea of switching your mental language. You know how people often translate from their native language to English when they're speaking? That's such a common hurdle.
Yeah, totally. I've noticed that, especially with beginners. It's like your brain wants to translate everything, but that really slows you down and can make speaking more stressful. Have you ever been caught in that translation trap?
Oh, for sure. When I was first learning a second language, I used to do that all the time. It felt like I was juggling two languages in my head, and honestly, it was exhausting. But the moment I stopped translating and just let my brain think in the new language, everything became smoother.
Exactly. And thinking in English isn't just for speaking faster. It also helps you understand the language in a more natural way. I always tell people, even if you know the grammar rules, if you're translating in your head, you'll never sound completely fluent.
That's a great point. So, how do you start thinking in English? I think the first step is to immerse yourself as much as possible. You've got to create an environment where English is all around you.
Yeah, immersion is key, and you don't need to live in an English speaking country to do that, right? I mean, these days with the internet, you can surround yourself with English anywhere.
Exactly. You can listen to podcasts, watch shows, read articles, anything that gets you used to how English is used naturally. Even setting your phone or apps to English can help.
Yeah, small changes like that make a big difference. And don't forget to think in English even when you're not speaking. Like, when you're walking down the street, try naming objects around you in English or describe what you're doing in your head. It's a simple habit, but it works.
I love that. It's like practicing without the pressure of having to speak perfectly. Even just thinking in simple sentences like, I'm going to the store, or the weather is nice today, gets your brain used to forming thoughts in English.
Totally. And you know what? Another thing that helps a lot is talking to yourself in English. I know it sounds a little funny, but if you're alone, it's a great way to practice. Like, have you ever found yourself just narrating your day in English?
Oh, all the time, especially when I'm trying to remember new words or phrases. I'll use them in a sentence to myself just to reinforce them in my mind.
Exactly. And the more you do that, the more natural it becomes to think in English. It's like you're training your brain to switch over automatically.
Right. And it's also about not being afraid to make mistakes. A lot of people hesitate to speak in English because they're worried about getting it wrong.
Yeah, and that fear really holds people back. I always say it's better to speak imperfectly than not at all. The more you practice, the more confident you'll get, even if you make a few mistakes along the way.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the process. And funnily enough, sometimes the mistakes help you remember things better.
Totally. So, we've covered immersion, thinking in English, and speaking to yourself. Let's talk about another key part: building a strong vocabulary. Because let's be real, it's hard to think in English if you don't know enough words.
Yes, expanding your vocabulary is crucial. But I'd say focus on learning words you actually need and will use in daily conversations. You don't need to memorize every single word in the dictionary.
Yeah, and learning vocabulary in context is super helpful. Like, instead of just memorizing lists of words, Try to learn them in sentences or stories so you can understand how they're used.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways to do that is through reading and listening. The more you expose yourself to English, the more words you'll naturally pick up without even realizing it.
Exactly. And speaking of listening, another huge thing is paying attention to how native speakers talk. It's not just about learning words, it's about learning the rhythm and flow of the language.
Right. English has a certain cadence, and if you can start thinking in that rhythm, it'll make your speech sound much more fluent. Watching movies or YouTube videos, or even listening to podcasts can help with that.
Yeah, and it's not just about what you say, but how you say it. Like in English, we often stress certain words to show emphasis. If you can get a feel for that, it makes your speech sound more natural.
That's so true. And you know what's funny? I used to practice mimicking the way people talked in movies. I'd pick a scene and try to copy the actor's intonation and stress patterns.
That's a great tip. It's like you're learning the music of the language. And once you get that down, thinking in English becomes a lot easier.
Exactly. It's all about repetition, immersion, and not being afraid to try things out. The more you practice, the faster your brain will get used to thinking in English.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone's journey is different. Some people pick it up quickly, while others take a little more time. But with consistency, you'll get there.
Yes. And don't forget to be patient with yourself. It's a process, but every little bit of practice counts. So, whether you're speaking to yourself, thinking in English, or listening to native speakers, you're moving in the right direction.
Exactly. It's all about building those small habits that lead to big progress. So, start today. Change your phone language, talk to yourself, immerse yourself in English, and give yourself the space to make mistakes.
And that's our takeaway for today. We hope this conversation has inspired you to think and speak in English more confidently. Don't forget to follow English Elevate Express for more tips and tricks to level up your English skills.
All right, before we sign off, Sarah, let's quickly recap some of the key points for our listeners, just in case they want a quick summary on how to start thinking and speaking in English.
Good idea. So, first, we talked about immersion. Surround yourself with English every day, even if it's just through small changes, like setting your phone or social media to English. The more you hear and see the language, the easier it becomes to think in it.
Exactly. Then we covered the importance of thinking in English during your daily activities. Whether you're walking, working, or cooking, try narrating what you're doing in your head in English. This helps you get used to forming thoughts without having to translate.
Right. And don't be afraid to talk to yourself in English. I know it sounds funny, but practicing speaking, even if you're the only one listening, really helps with fluency and confidence.
Yeah, I love that one. And then we talked about building your vocabulary, but not just by memorizing lists. Learn new words in context, whether that's through reading, listening, or even watching movies in English.
And don't forget to pay attention to how native speakers talk. The rhythm, stress, and intonation in English are super important. Try mimicking the way people speak in shows or YouTube videos and practice sounding more natural.
Yes. And finally, we emphasize not being afraid to make mistakes. Fluency isn't about being perfect, it's about being confident enough to communicate. So keep practicing even if you mess up along the way.
Exactly. And like you said earlier, everyone's journey is different. The key is consistency. Stick with these habits, and you'll notice progress over time.
Yeah, consistency is everything. Language learning doesn't happen overnight, but it's totally achievable if you keep putting in the effort. And remember, it should be fun. The more you enjoy the process, the faster you'll improve.
Absolutely. Learning to think and speak in English should be an exciting experience, not something that stresses you out. So, find ways to incorporate English into your life that you actually enjoy.
Exactly. Like, if you love music, listen to English songs and try to understand the lyrics. Or if you're into gaming, play games that have English dialogue. There are so many ways to learn that don't feel like studying.
Yes, make it a part of your hobbies, your daily routine, anything that feels natural for you. And one last thing, don't forget to practice speaking with other people when you can, whether that's online or in real life.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even if it's just casual conversations, speaking with others helps you apply everything you've been learning. Plus, it builds your confidence in real world situations.
For sure. And if you're not in an environment where you can easily speak with native English speakers, there are so many language exchange platforms out there where you can connect with people from all over the world.
That's true. It's a great way to practice English in a relaxed conversational setting. And who knows, you might even make some new friends along the way.
Exactly. The point is, you don't need a formal classroom setting to improve your English. Everyday conversations, even if they're short, can make a huge difference.
Right. And those conversations don't need to be perfect. Just putting yourself out there and speaking as much as you can is the most important part. The more you do it, the more natural it will become.
Exactly. So, to all our listeners out there, start incorporating these tips into your routine and see what works best for you. Everyone has their own pace, but with regular practice, you'll see the progress.
And don't forget to celebrate your small wins along the way. Even if you're just able to think in English for a few minutes longer than you could last week, that's progress. Recognize it and keep going.
Yes, I love that. Learning a language is a journey, and every step forward counts. So, keep elevating your English, everyone.
All right, before we go, Sarah, something just popped into my head. What about when people hit that frustrating plateau? You know, when they've been practicing for a while but don't feel like they're improving? What advice would you give for breaking through that?
Oh, the plateau. That can be tough, but it's totally normal. It's that stage where you're not a beginner anymore. So the big leaps in progress aren't as noticeable, but you're still growing, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I've been there with other languages too. It's like your brain needs time to catch up to all the new information. So, even if you don't feel like you're improving, you are. You just need to keep pushing.
Exactly. One thing I always suggest is changing up your routine. If you've been practicing the same way for a while, switch it up. Try different activities, like joining a conversation club, reading books, or even journaling in English. A new approach can refresh your brain and kickstart your progress again.
Yeah, that's a great point. Variety is key. I also think people sometimes focus too much on what they can't do yet, instead of recognizing how far they've come. Celebrating the progress you've already made can really help your motivation.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be major milestones. Maybe now you can watch a movie in English without subtitles. Or maybe you can follow a conversation a bit more easily. That's huge.
Exactly. I remember when I first reached the point where I could understand English songs. That felt like a win, even if I still wasn't speaking perfectly. It gave me the boost to keep going.
That's a great example. Finding those small wins is crucial. And also, don't forget to revisit the basics sometimes. It might sound weird, but going back to simple grammar or vocabulary can help you strengthen your foundation.
Totally. I think people often feel like they should only be learning advanced stuff once they've reached a certain level. But reinforcing the basics makes everything else stronger.
Exactly. Plus, revisiting simpler things can remind you how much you've actually mastered. It's a confidence boost when you realize, wow, this used to be hard, but now it's easy.
Yeah, that's a great feeling. And for anyone who feels stuck, remember, learning isn't always linear. Sometimes progress happens behind the scenes, and it'll click when you least expect it.
Totally. Language learning is like that. You might feel like you're plateauing, but then one day you'll realize you're thinking in English more naturally, or you'll have a conversation and everything flows. Those moments remind you why you're doing it.
Exactly. And the key is patience. I know we keep saying it, but it's true. Don't get discouraged. You're growing even when you don't see it.
Yes. And also, take breaks when you need to. It's okay to step away for a bit if you're feeling burnt out. Sometimes, coming back after a short break can give you fresh energy and perspective.
Totally. A little rest can do wonders. And when you return, try to approach English with a new mindset. Maybe challenge yourself with something fun, like learning idioms or slang. It's a nice break from formal learning, but still useful.
Yes, I love that. Idioms and slang are such a fun way to mix things up. Plus, they're practical. You'll hear them all the time in everyday conversation. It's a good way to feel more connected to the language.
Exactly. And one thing that helped me when I felt stuck was setting small, specific goals. Instead of just saying, I want to be fluent, I'd focus on something achievable, like, I want to hold a 5-minute conversation in English without switching to my native language.
That's such a great strategy. Breaking down big goals into smaller, manageable ones makes the process less overwhelming. And every time you achieve one of those mini goals, it's a reminder that you're moving forward.
Totally. It keeps you motivated, and each small win adds up. Soon, you'll look back and realize how much you've actually accomplished.
Exactly. So, to anyone feeling stuck or like they've hit a plateau, try these tips. Mix up your routine, revisit the basics, set small goals, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. Progress is happening, even if it's behind the scenes.
Yes, and if you ever feel frustrated, just remember why you started learning English in the first place. Whether it's for travel, work, or connecting with new people, that motivation can help you push through.
Exactly. Keep that why in mind and know that every bit of practice is bringing you closer to your goals, even if it doesn't always feel like it.
Right, and don't forget to have fun with it. Learning a language is an amazing skill, but it should also be enjoyable. The more you enjoy the process, the faster you'll improve.
Totally. And we're here to remind you of that every step of the way. So, keep tuning in to English Elevate Express for more tips, motivation, and conversations that will keep you on track.
Yeah, we're in this together and we love hearing about your progress. Reach out, share your wins, and let us know what's working for you. Hey, Sarah, my friend had the same problem, thinking and speaking in English. He struggled for a while, but you know what? He managed to overcome it.
Really? That's awesome. What did he do to get past it? I know a lot of people hit that block where they understand English but can't think or speak fluently.
Yeah, exactly. He was stuck in that phase too. He could read and understand English pretty well, but when it came to speaking, his mind would just freeze. He'd try to translate everything in his head before speaking, which slowed him down.
That sounds frustrating. So, how did he break through?
It all started when he realized that the translation method was holding him back. He'd spend too much time thinking in his native language and trying to convert it to English, which made him second guess everything. The turning point was when he decided to force himself to think directly in English. He made a rule for himself: no translating in his head.
That must have been tough at first, right? Trying to think in English without translating.
Oh, definitely. He struggled with it for a while, but he set small, manageable goals, like describing his daily routine in English or thinking in English while doing simple tasks like making breakfast. He started narrating his day to himself, things like, I'm brushing my teeth or I need to leave in 10 minutes. It felt awkward at first, but over time it became natural.
That's such a smart approach. So, he trained his brain to switch over to English in everyday situations, right? How long did it take before he noticed any changes?
After a few weeks, he started noticing that he didn't need to translate as much anymore. His thoughts would just come out in English, especially with familiar phrases and situations. But he also realized he needed to expand his vocabulary for more complex ideas. So he started reading books and watching shows in English without subtitles.
That's a great way to immerse yourself in the language. Did he do anything specific to improve his speaking?
Yeah, he focused on practicing out loud. He talked to himself whenever he was alone, like while walking, he'd describe everything around him in English. He also made it a point to have short conversations with friends in English, even if it felt a bit uncomfortable at first. He said that those little conversations really helped build his confidence.
I've heard that talking to yourself is such an effective technique. It feels weird at first, but I guess it helps you get used to forming sentences quickly without the pressure of speaking to someone else.
Exactly. That was his experience too. The more he practiced out loud, the less nervous he felt about speaking with others. He also found it helpful to record himself speaking and then listen back to spot any mistakes or areas for improvement.
That's a fantastic idea. Recording yourself is a great way to track progress, and it's probably pretty encouraging to hear how much you improve over time.
Yeah, for sure. Plus, it gave him a chance to work on his pronunciation and rhythm, which he realized were just as important as getting the grammar right. He'd mimic native speakers from movies and YouTube videos to get the natural flow of conversation down.
So, he used a combination of thinking in English, practicing speaking out loud, and listening to native speakers to really train his brain to function in English. That's brilliant. How's he doing with it now?
He's doing great. Now, he can hold conversations in English without overthinking or getting stuck. It's not perfect, of course, but he's a lot more fluent and confident. And the best part? He actually enjoys speaking English now, which wasn't the case before.
That's amazing. It really shows that consistency and persistence pay off. His story is super encouraging for anyone struggling with thinking and speaking in English. It's all about practice and slowly rewiring your brain to make English a natural part of your life.
Exactly. He told me that the hardest part was getting over the fear of making mistakes. Once he stopped worrying about being perfect, things started flowing a lot better.
Yeah, perfectionism can be a huge block. But like your friend proved, it's more important to focus on progress than perfection. Every little step forward counts.
That's what he realized too. And now he's actually helping a few other friends who are in the same boat, encouraging them to practice daily and not be afraid of making mistakes.
I love that. It's great to see how one person's success can inspire others. Learning a language is such a personal journey, but hearing stories like this can really motivate people to keep going.
Exactly. I figured his story might resonate with some of our listeners too. It's a reminder that anyone can overcome this challenge with the right mindset and consistent practice.
Totally. I'm sure it'll inspire a lot of people who are facing the same struggle. Thanks for sharing it, Alex.
Of course, hopefully it gives our listeners some new ideas on how to tackle this problem. If my friend can do it, anyone can.
Absolutely. And just like him, everyone listening can start today by making those small changes. Thinking in English, practicing out loud, and embracing the learning process without fear of mistakes.
Right, it's all about taking that first step and staying consistent. So, if you're struggling with thinking and speaking in English, remember, you're not alone, and you can overcome it.
So, Alex, now that your friend has made such great progress, do you think he has any specific advice for someone who's just starting out with thinking in English? I know for beginners, the idea of even thinking in a new language can feel overwhelming.
Yeah, actually, he did mention a few things that helped him when he was starting. One of the big ones was not being afraid to use simple sentences. A lot of people get stuck because they want to express themselves with the same complexity they use in their native language. But his advice was to keep it simple at first.
That makes sense. I've noticed that some learners feel like they have to speak perfectly or use complicated structures. But sometimes just getting the basics out is a huge win.
Exactly. He told me that at first he was trying to translate really complex thoughts from his native language, and it just didn't work. So he started with simple things, basic thoughts like, I am hungry or the weather is nice today. He'd focus on those kinds of sentences until he felt comfortable enough to build on them.
That's such a good point. I think it's easy to forget that fluency doesn't mean perfection. It means being able to communicate your ideas, even if they're simple. And over time, the complexity will come naturally.
Right. And another thing that helped him a lot was using visualization. He'd imagine himself in different situations where he needed to speak English. For example, he'd picture himself ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions, and then he'd mentally rehearse what he would say in English.
Oh, I love that. Visualization is such a powerful tool. It's almost like preparing your brain for real life scenarios before they even happen.
Exactly. It builds confidence because you've already practiced it in your mind. And when he eventually faced those situations in real life, he felt more prepared and less nervous.
That's brilliant. It's like mental training for language learners. And I guess the more you do it, the easier it gets to think in English naturally.
Yeah, that's what he said too. At first, it was a conscious effort, but after a while, it became more automatic. And he also stressed the importance of consistency. He'd make it a habit to practice thinking in English every single day, even if it was just for a few minutes.
That daily habit is so key. It's like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And I think making time for English every day, even in small ways, really builds momentum.
Exactly. He told me that at first it was a bit of a struggle to remember to practice every day. But once it became part of his routine, it was easier. He'd do it while walking to work or even while cooking. Just small moments of practice throughout the day.
I think that's such a good takeaway for anyone listening. It doesn't have to be this big, formal study session. Even a few minutes of thinking or speaking in English during your daily routine can make a huge difference over time.
Totally. And one other thing he did was immerse himself in English as much as possible. He surrounded himself with the language, listening to podcasts, watching movies, reading news articles, all in English. The more he exposed himself to it, the easier it became to think in English.
Immersion is so powerful. It's like you're constantly feeding your brain with new vocabulary, phrases, and ways of thinking. Even if you don't understand everything at first, your brain is absorbing the language and making connections.
Exactly. He said at first it was tough because he'd only catch parts of what was being said. But over time, he started understanding more. It wasn't just about understanding words, but getting used to the rhythm of the language, how sentences are structured, and the way people naturally speak.
That's such an important point. I think a lot of learners feel discouraged when they don't understand every single word. But really, it's about getting the overall meaning and letting your brain adjust.
Yeah, exactly. He told me that once he stopped stressing about understanding every word, he actually started enjoying the process more. And that made him more motivated to keep going.
It's all about shifting your mindset, isn't it? Instead of seeing it as something you have to do, it becomes something you enjoy and look forward to.
Totally. And the last thing he mentioned, which I think is really important, is that he made sure to celebrate his progress. Even small victories, like having a short conversation without getting stuck or thinking in English for a few minutes, he would acknowledge those wins.
That's so important. Celebrating those small victories helps build confidence and keeps you motivated to keep improving. Language learning is a long journey, so recognizing the progress you're making along the way is crucial.
Exactly. He said that whenever he felt discouraged, he'd look back and realize how far he'd come. It's easy to focus on what you still can't do, but when you stop and reflect on the progress you've made, it can really boost your confidence.
That's such a great reminder for anyone out there struggling. Progress isn't always obvious, but it's happening, even if it's slow. And celebrating those wins keeps you moving forward.
Absolutely, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from his story. You don't have to be perfect or fluent right away. The important thing is to keep practicing, stay consistent, and be patient with yourself.
Exactly. Learning to think and speak in English is a process, and there's no shortcut. But with the right mindset and daily practice, anyone can overcome the challenges, just like your friend did.
Yeah, I hope his story inspires others who are feeling stuck right now. It's totally possible to break through those mental blocks and start thinking in English more naturally.
Definitely. And just like your friend, anyone can take small steps today to start thinking in English, whether it's narrating their day, visualizing conversations, or just immersing themselves in the language more.
Some common questions and answers related to the topic of how to think and speak in English.
Why is it difficult to think in English?
It's challenging because most learners are used to thinking in their native language. When learning English, many people try to translate their thoughts into English, which slows down the process and leads to hesitation. Thinking in English requires training your brain to bypass your native language and directly associate ideas with English words, which takes time and practice.
How can I stop translating in my head while speaking English?
The key to stopping translation is to immerse yourself in English as much as possible. Start by thinking in simple English during your daily activities. Describe what you're doing or planning to do in English. Gradually, your brain will get used to processing thoughts directly in English. Also, practice common phrases and responses until they become automatic, so you don't have to think about them in your native language.
What exercises can help me think in English?
Some effective exercises include daily narration, talk to yourself in English about your daily activities, like what you're eating or what your plans are for the day. Visualization, picture yourself in common situations, like at a restaurant or in a meeting, and mentally rehearse what you would say in English. Journal in English. Write your thoughts, plans, or even to-do lists in English every day to practice thinking directly in the language. Language immersion. Surround yourself with English. Watch English shows, read books, listen to podcasts, and engage in conversations with others.
How long does it take to think in English fluently?
It depends on how much time and effort you dedicate to practicing. Some people can start thinking in English within a few months of consistent practice, while for others, it may take longer. The more you immerse yourself in English and practice thinking and speaking without translating, the faster you'll progress.
What if I can understand English but can't speak fluently?
Understanding but not speaking fluently is a common issue. To bridge this gap, focus on active practice. Try speaking English out loud, even if it's just to yourself. Recording your voice and listening to it can help identify areas to improve. Also, start engaging in short conversations with friends or language partners, focusing on communicating rather than being perfect. Confidence grows with practice.
How can I build confidence when speaking English?
Building confidence comes from regular practice and embracing mistakes as part of the learning process. Start by speaking to yourself in English, then slowly move to conversations with others. Celebrate small wins, like completing a conversation without freezing or using new words correctly. Also, surrounding yourself with supportive people who encourage your efforts can make a big difference.
Is thinking in English more important than speaking fluently?
Both are important, but thinking in English is a stepping stone to speaking fluently. When you train your brain to think in English, speaking becomes easier and more natural because you don't have to pause to translate. Over time, fluency will come as a result of your ability to think quickly in English.
What role does immersion play in learning to think in English?
Immersion is one of the most powerful tools for learning to think and speak in English. By surrounding yourself with English through media, conversations, and even your own thoughts, you train your brain to process the language in a natural way. The more exposure you get, the more familiar English becomes, and the easier it is to think in it without relying on translation.
How do I handle fear of making mistakes while speaking?
It's important to remember that making mistakes is a natural part of learning any language. Don't aim for perfection, aim for communication. Focus on getting your point across, and over time, your accuracy will improve. The more you speak, the more comfortable you'll become. Remember, even native speakers make mistakes.
Can I train myself to think in English without a teacher or partner to practice with?
Yes, you can train yourself by practicing on your own. Start by thinking in English about simple things like your plans for the day or mentally narrating your actions. You can also read in English, listen to English media, and repeat phrases out loud to yourself. While having a conversation partner is helpful, self practice is effective and can make a big difference.
Why do I feel stuck when trying to speak in English, even though I know the words?
Feeling stuck often happens because your brain is still in the process of connecting the words you know with the real time action of speaking. It's like knowing the theory, but finding it hard to apply in practice. This happens when you haven't yet developed automaticity, the ability to recall words and phrases without conscious effort. To overcome this, practice speaking in low pressure situations, such as speaking to yourself or with friends who understand your learning process. Focus on fluency first, not accuracy. The more you practice, the more automatic speaking becomes. And over time, those stuck moments will reduce.
How can I improve my English vocabulary while trying to think in English?
To improve your vocabulary while thinking in English, you need to be intentional about learning new words and using them in your thoughts. Here's how you can do it. Learn new words in context. When you learn a new word, make sure to understand its meaning and how it's used in sentences. Instead of memorizing a list of words, try to read articles, watch videos, or listen to conversations where those words are naturally used. Use new words in your thoughts. When you learn a new word, immediately try to think of ways to use it in sentences. For example, if you learn the word adventure, think to yourself, this weekend, I will go on an adventure to explore a new place. Create mental categories. Group words by theme: food, travel, work, emotions, and try thinking about those topics in English. This will make it easier for your brain to recall words when you need them. By repeatedly exposing yourself to new words and mentally practicing them, you'll naturally start using a richer vocabulary in your thoughts and conversations.
What should I do when I can't think of the right word in English while speaking?
When you can't think of the right word in English, don't panic. Here are a few strategies to keep the conversation flowing. Use simpler words. If you can't find the exact word, describe it with simpler words. For example, if you forget the word pencil, you could say, the thing you write with. Paraphrase. Try explaining the idea in different words. For example, if you forget the word delicious, you might say, it tastes really good. Use gestures. Sometimes nonverbal communication, like pointing or miming, can help convey your message when words fail. Ask for help. If you're speaking with someone else, don't be afraid to ask, what's the word for? Most people will be happy to help, and it's a learning opportunity. Remember, it's more important to keep the conversation going than to pause and think for too long. With practice, you'll eventually find that your ability to recall words improves.
How can I train myself to think in English when I'm constantly surrounded by my native language?
Even if you're surrounded by your native language, you can create an English environment for yourself by immersing your brain in English content. Here's how. Switch your devices to English. Change the language on your phone, computer, and social media accounts to English. This will force your brain to interact with English regularly. Listen to English podcasts or music. Whenever you have free time, whether you're commuting, cooking, or exercising, listen to English audio. This keeps your brain engaged with a language even when you're not actively studying. Join online communities, participate in English-speaking online groups, forums, or language exchange platforms. This way, you'll have daily interactions in English, even if you're physically surrounded by your native language. Set mental reminders. Throughout the day, remind yourself to think in English. You can set alarms or notifications with messages like, think about your day in English, or describe what you see in English. By creating these small but constant English-speaking moments, your brain will start to get used to thinking in English, even if you live in a non-English environment.
Is it okay to mix my native language with English while I'm learning to think and speak fluently?
Yes, mixing languages, often called code switching, is completely normal, especially when you're learning. It's natural for your brain to pull words from your native language when you can't think of the right word in English. Here's why it's okay. It's part of the learning process. As you improve, the amount of your native language you use will decrease, and English will take over. The important thing is to keep practicing, even if it's a mix at first. It helps with communication. If you're having a conversation and need to switch to your native language for certain words, it's better to do so than to stop speaking entirely. The goal is to keep communicating. Gradually transition. Over time, try to replace more and more of your native language with English. You can do this by looking up the English words you didn't know after the conversation and making an effort to use them next time. So, yes, it's okay to mix languages, but aim to gradually increase your use of English as you become more comfortable.
How can I overcome the fear of speaking English with native speakers?
Fear of speaking with native speakers is common, but overcoming it is crucial for improving your fluency. Here's how to approach it. Shift your mindset. Native speakers generally understand that English learners may struggle, and most are patient and encouraging. Instead of fearing judgment, think of each conversation as a learning opportunity. Start small. Begin by speaking with friends, language partners, or non native speakers who also speak English. As you gain confidence, gradually start interacting with native speakers. Prepare ahead. If you know you'll be in a situation where you need to speak with native speakers, prepare some common phrases or questions in advance. This can ease your nerves. Focus on communication, not perfection. The goal is to get your message across, not to speak without mistakes. Native speakers make mistakes too, so don't be too hard on yourself. Celebrate small wins. After each conversation, even if it didn't go perfectly, focus on what went well. Did you understand something? Did you make yourself understood? Celebrate those wins to build confidence. With regular practice, you'll gradually feel more comfortable speaking English with native speakers.
What are the benefits of thinking in English, even when I'm not speaking?
Thinking in English has several benefits, even when you're not actively speaking. Faster recall. When you think in English, you train your brain to access English words and phrases more quickly. This makes speaking in real life situations faster and more fluid. Better comprehension. By thinking in English, you'll better understand conversations, especially with native speakers. It helps you get used to the structure, rhythm, and flow of English sentences. Reduced translation time. When you think directly in English, you eliminate the step of translating from your native language, which can slow you down and lead to mistakes. Improved fluency. Thinking in English is one of the key steps to achieving fluency. Your thoughts and speech will eventually sync up, making you a more confident and natural speaker. Confidence boost. The more you practice thinking in English, the more comfortable you'll feel when it comes time to speak. It's a great way to rehearse and prepare for real conversations. In short, thinking in English helps improve all aspects of language learning, from comprehension to speaking fluency.
Can thinking in English improve my writing skills too?
Yes, thinking in English can significantly improve your writing skills. When you think in English, you're essentially practicing how to structure thoughts in the language, which directly translates to better writing. Here's how it helps. Natural sentence structure. When you think in English, you become more familiar with how sentences are formed. This makes it easier to write grammatically correct and natural sentences. Faster writing. If you think in English, you don't need to translate from your native language, which can slow down the writing process. Your thoughts flow more easily onto the page. Vocabulary usage. By thinking in English, you'll expand your vocabulary, which will naturally make your writing richer and more varied. Consistency. Writing becomes easier when your brain is already accustomed to processing thoughts in English. You'll be able to focus on the content and style rather than struggling with basic language issues. The more you train your brain to think in English, the more your writing will benefit as well.
How can I make thinking in English a part of my daily routine?
To make thinking in English a daily habit, try incorporating these strategies into your routine. Morning thoughts. Start your day by thinking about what you're going to do, but in English. For example, think, I will have breakfast, or today I have a meeting. Daily activities. While doing routine tasks like cooking, walking, or commuting, narrate what you're doing in English. Even if it's simple sentences, it helps your brain get used to the language. English conversations in your head. Imagine short conversations in English with friends, coworkers, or even strangers. Rehearse how you might respond to common questions or situations. Review your day in English. Before going to bed, mentally go over what happened during the day in English. Reflect on what you did, saw, and experienced. Use English media. Surround yourself with English through podcasts, YouTube videos, TV shows, or music. This will immerse you in the language and naturally encourage you to think in English. By incorporating these small steps into your day, thinking in English will become second nature, and you'll see improvements in both your fluency and confidence.
What if I understand English grammar but still can't speak fluently?
Understanding grammar is just one part of becoming fluent in English. Fluency is about using the language, not just knowing the rules. Here's why you might still struggle and how to improve. Passive knowledge. Many learners can understand grammar when reading or writing, but struggle to apply it in real-time conversations. This is because their language skills are more passive. They know the rules, but don't practice using them actively. Solution. Focus on speaking practice. Engage in conversations, record yourself speaking, or speak to yourself in the mirror. Don't worry about making mistakes. Fluency comes from repetition and using the language regularly. Muscle memory. Speaking is like any other skill that requires practice. Just like you learn to ride a bike by riding, you learn to speak English fluently by actually speaking. Grammar understanding is important, but speaking fluently requires using that knowledge in conversations, so prioritize real-world practice.
How do I handle complex ideas when thinking or speaking in English?
Expressing complex ideas in English can be challenging for learners, especially when vocabulary and grammar don't feel second nature yet. Here are strategies to simplify the process. Break it down. Instead of trying to express a complex idea all at once, break it down into smaller, simpler sentences. For example, instead of saying, I'm struggling to find the balance between my professional and personal life due to the demands of my job, you could say, my job is hard. I work a lot. It's hard to have time for my personal life. Use examples. Sometimes giving examples helps explain complex ideas more easily. For instance, instead of saying, I feel overwhelmed, you might say, I have too many tasks to do. I don't know where to start. Ask for time. If you're in a conversation and need more time to organize your thoughts, don't be afraid to pause and say, let me think about how to explain this. Over time, your ability to express more complex ideas will improve as you become more comfortable with English.
Is it normal to feel mentally tired when thinking in English?
Yes, it's completely normal to feel mentally tired when you're first learning to think in English. Here's why. Cognitive load. Your brain is working harder because it's processing a foreign language and trying to use new words, grammar, and sentence structures. This is similar to how learning any new skill can feel exhausting at first. Mental fatigue. When you think in your native language, it's automatic, but in English, you have to consciously think about every word, which can be tiring. Over time, as your brain gets used to the new language, this fatigue will lessen. Solution: gradually build your mental stamina by thinking in English for short periods and gradually increasing the time. Take breaks when needed, but keep pushing yourself a little more each day. As with any new skill, thinking in English becomes easier and less tiring with practice and repetition.
What are some common mistakes learners make when trying to think and speak in English?
Here are a few common mistakes learners make, along with solutions to avoid them. Overthinking grammar. Some learners focus too much on speaking perfectly, which can lead to hesitation or frustration. Solution: prioritize communication over perfect grammar. You can correct mistakes later, relying on translation. Translating from your native language to English slows you down and often leads to awkward phrasing. Solution: try to think in English directly. Start with simple sentences and build from there. Fear of making mistakes. Many learners avoid speaking or thinking in English because they're afraid of making mistakes. Solution: embrace mistakes as part of the learning process. The more you practice, the better you'll get. Not practicing enough. Thinking and speaking in English requires regular practice. Some learners only practice occasionally, which slows progress. Solution: make thinking and speaking in English a daily habit, even if it's just for a few minutes. By being aware of these common mistakes, you can actively work to avoid them and improve your fluency faster.
How can I think in English when I only know basic vocabulary?
If you have a limited vocabulary, thinking in English can feel challenging, but it's still possible. Here's how to make the most of what you know. Use simple sentences. Start by thinking in short, basic sentences. Instead of saying, I have to organize my entire week around these meetings, think, I have meetings this week. I need to plan. Focus on familiar words. Think about things you already know how to say in English, such as daily activities, eating, working, walking. Narrate those in your head using the vocabulary you have. Describe with what you know. If you don't know the exact word, try to describe it with other words you know. For example, if you forget airplane, you could think the big machine that flies. Learn phrases. Instead of individual words, learn phrases or collocations, common word combinations. This helps you speak more naturally and gives you more language chunks to think in. Starting with simple vocabulary and phrases allows you to think in English without feeling overwhelmed. Over time, as you expand your vocabulary, your thoughts will become more complex.
Why do I struggle to find the right words in English when speaking, even though I can write well?
The reason you might struggle to speak fluently, despite being able to write well, is because writing and speaking are two different skills that require different types of practice. Here's why this happens. Writing allows more time. When you write, you have more time to think about word choices, sentence structure, and grammar. Speaking, on the other hand, happens in real time, and you need to react quickly without the luxury of extra time. Speaking involves pressure. The pressure of real-time conversation can make it harder to recall words. You might feel nervous or rushed, which causes your mind to go blank. Solution: to improve, practice speaking spontaneously without worrying about getting it perfect. Try speaking to yourself or recording short audio clips. The goal is to train your brain to recall words faster in the moment. The more you practice speaking, the easier it will become to access the words you already know when writing.
Can reading books help me think in English?
Absolutely. Reading books in English is an excellent way to improve your ability to think in English. Here's how reading helps. Exposure to natural language. Reading exposes you to how native speakers use English, including sentence structures, vocabulary, and idioms. This helps you internalize the language, making it easier to think in English. Contextual learning. When you read, you learn new words in context, which makes it easier to remember and use them in your own thoughts and conversations. Improved comprehension. Regular reading strengthens your overall understanding of English, so you'll be better equipped to think and speak in the language. Mental practice. When you read, you're mentally processing English, which trains your brain to think in the language. To make reading a tool for thinking in English, choose books at your language level and try summarizing chapters or describing characters in your mind as you read.
How can I improve my pronunciation while thinking in English?
Improving pronunciation starts with both listening and speaking practice. Here's how thinking in English can help with your pronunciation. Listen actively. Pay attention to how native speakers pronounce words in podcasts, movies, or videos. Try to mimic their accent and intonation in your mind. Visualize the sounds. As you think in English, imagine how words are pronounced. This helps you prepare your brain to produce the correct sounds when you speak. Speak out loud. After thinking in English, practice saying the words out loud to reinforce the correct pronunciation. Record yourself if possible and compare it to native speakers. Use phonetic tools. Online resources like YouTube or pronunciation apps can help you practice the specific sounds you struggle with, such as difficult vowel sounds or intonation patterns. By combining mental practice, thinking in English, with physical practice, speaking out loud, you'll gradually improve your pronunciation and sound more natural when speaking.
How can I handle fast English conversations?
Fast English conversations can be overwhelming, especially for learners. Here's how to manage and think in English, even during rapid discussions. Focus on key words. Don't try to understand every word. Instead, focus on the key words or phrases that give you the main idea of what's being said. This will help you stay engaged without feeling lost. Ask for repetition. If someone speaks too quickly, don't hesitate to ask, "Can you say that again more slowly?" Or, "I didn't catch that. Could you repeat?" Stay calm. It's easy to feel frustrated or panic in fast conversations, but staying calm helps you think more clearly and catch up to the flow of conversation. Practice with fast content. Expose yourself to faster English through podcasts, news, or TV shows. At first, you may not understand everything, but over time, your brain will adjust, and you'll be able to think and process faster. As you gain experience, your ability to keep up with fast English conversations will improve, and you'll become more confident in both thinking and responding in real time.